Thank you for being here today. My name is Isabel Otero. I am the Georgia Policy Director for the SPLC Action Fund. The SPLC Action Fund is a catalyst for racial justice in the South and beyond, working in partnership with communities to dismantle white supremacy, strengthen intersectional movements, and advance human rights for all people. We are very excited to be here today to announce the launch of our latest report titled Sheltering Injustice. This report is the result of a year-long collaboration with many of the advocates that you see here today, as we call for our state to stop criminalizing people experiencing homelessness, especially those who have been experiencing poverty for a long time. First, you will hear from the author of this report, my colleague Gina Azito Thompson, who is a policy analyst with the Southern Poverty Law Center.
Good afternoon. My name is Gina Azito Thompson, and I'm SPLC's Eradicating Poverty Policy Analyst. I'm also the author of our new report, Sheltering Injustice, a call for Georgia to stop criminalizing people experiencing homelessness. I'm honored to be here today with these esteemed guests to discuss the issue of Georgia's harmful practice of criminalizing people experiencing homelessness. Housing is a human right, and access to safe and stable housing is essential to a safe and vibrant community, state, and country. Yet the rising costs of housing and lack of supportive services mean that many across the state, the majority of whom are people of color, especially Black people, are deprived of housing and subsequently experience homelessness. Importantly, this is an urgent matter both in Georgia and across the country. In fact, a recent Harvard report found that more than half of renters could not afford to pay their rent in 2022. And because of these harmful laws, people experiencing homelessness in the Peach State are also subject to constant interactions with law enforcement, further compounding the overrepresentation of people of color, both in the criminal legal system and in those who experience homelessness, the matter before us today. To understand the human impact of this issue, I want to tell you about someone I met around 4 months ago. I was honored to speak with Miss Sylvia, an 80-year-old Black woman experiencing homelessness, whose story is featured in Sheltering Injustice. Miss Sylvia was living in a shelter in Athens, Georgia, but sometimes she'd also sleep outside, using a poncho to cover herself when it rains. Now, Miss Sylvia uses a mobility walker to assist with her walking. And while speaking with her, she lifted her dress to show me her ankles. They were covered with ulcers, and she mentioned they were quite painful. Yet she had walked 3 hours the night before to get back to the shelter because she'd missed her last bus of the night. To top off the hardships she experienced, Miss Sylvia has also had to deal with criminalization simply because she didn't have access to housing. She shared with me a story about a time where she sat down at a shopping center in Athens to rest after a long day in the hot Georgia sun. She sat down with a drink to cool off and was met with law enforcement handing her a trespass warning after she accidentally fell off to sleep. She said that she still had a year left on her ban before she could return to the shopping center. In that instance, she was simply sitting and resting, things that we all have probably done in the past few hours but don't have to think about. Unfortunately, Miss Sylvia's story is not an outlier. In 2022, over 10,000 Georgians were reported to be experiencing homelessness across the state, with more than half of those people living unsheltered. Frankly, with all the resources available to provide affordable housing, that number was over 10,000 too many. In many of Georgia's districts, the number of people who are living unsheltered are disproportionately people of color. For example, between 2017 and 2022, Black people accounted for 28% of the total population of Athens-Clarke County, yet 40% of the unsheltered individual population. What's more is people, like Miss Sylvia, people experiencing homelessness, are also disproportionately impacted in the criminal legal system. For example, 1 in 8 people booked in Atlanta City Jail were experiencing homelessness. Georgia has a number of laws that are putting thousands of people experiencing homelessness at risk of arrest. In 2023, the Georgia legislature passed Senate Bill 62, which forces cities and towns to enforce bans on public camping and punishes people for simply sitting or sleeping in public places. Sitting and sleeping are both essential to being human, to surviving. Yet what defines them as legal is whether a person has housing to perform these activities in. As we highlight in our new report, the criminalization of people experiencing homelessness has a human cost. Many of the people we interviewed often felt fear, shame, judgment, and stress during a time where kindness, rather than criminalization, would have gone a long way. We should not expose people to further trauma with the threat of arrest and punishment. Rather, people experiencing homelessness should be given the opportunity to choose what's best for them by providing them with access to resources and housing. Fortunately, our report sees a path forward. Specifically, as we outlined in the report, we urge Georgia and its localities to take the following steps: repeal, defund, and stop enforcing current laws that criminalize homelessness and reform policies that especially impact people with low incomes who are involved with the legal system, like cash bail and probation fees. Stop sweeping encampments and instead invest in creating pilot programs that allow people to access quality housing with cash assistance. And add housing status as a measure of homelessness to the list of protected categories in relevant anti-discrimination laws. But first and foremost, Georgia should always begin with speaking and hearing from those most impacted by its policies, such as those that criminalize people for experiencing homelessness. Integrating and centering people with lived experience in the efforts to prevent criminalization is crucial to preventing further harm and undoing the damage that criminalization is causing. That's why I'm so honored today to be joined by Jerry, one of the people with lived experience that I interviewed for the report, and whose story and vision for the future informed its policy proposals. As you'll hear, Jerry is a successful Athens-based entertainer who hasn't let his circumstances and experiences with homelessness deter the plans for his future and his family. Jerry's experiences underscore the urgent need for reform so that other people don't have to go through similar situations. And yet, despite Jerry's experience, he remains warm-hearted. I'm inspired by Jerry's determination, strength, and hope for the future. One where people experiencing homelessness aren't criminalized, and housing truly is accessible for all. Thank you.
Good job, Jim. Good afternoon. My name is Jerry Hurst. I'm a resident of Georgia, and I'm honored to be with you all today to share my story, so you can see the human impact of historic and ongoing efforts to criminalize people experiencing homelessness today. Look at me today, a success story, who I have a career as a street entertainer, also known as busking, and a hobby that I also love and enjoy. I'm a father of a 2-year-old daughter. Her name is Journey. And I've been in my current relationship for over 2 years now. And just until recently, I was also experiencing homelessness. For over 9 months, I lived in a hotel and had not much permanent housing of my own. But before I was in the hotel, I couch surfed a little bit, but I mainly lived outside, sometimes in a parking deck. Not a single day outside living is okay, not one day. It also affects and impacts every aspect of your life, and it tends to make you hard to trust people. Especially since I became a new father, living outside was something I couldn't let happen to my daughter. Just trying to provide for my child, I was often approached by law enforcement officers when I was living on the streets. Many times it felt like officers had no respect for me simply because I didn't have housing. For instance, I remember times where police would mishandle my personal items, and on several occasions, they destroyed my property. The things that I used to make a living, like my microphones and my 5-gallon buckets that I use as drums. This stuff meant almost nothing to them, but really meant so much to me. I call them priceless. It never broke my spirit though. However, the dehumanizing and embarrassing feelings made me feel like I didn't matter, but I matter. And I have a right to dignity and respect, regardless of my housing situation. That's why it means so much to me that the first proposal of SPLC's new report is that people that with lived experiences like me should be at the center of the efforts to fight back against criminalization of people experiencing homelessness. We are statistics. We ain't just numbers. We are real people with stories just like the one that I just shared with you today, my truth. We are people who need safe and secure housing, affordable rent, and livable wages, and other resources meant to support us in securing a full-time housing. This is what we need, not living in constant fear of being arrested for just trying to have somewhere to eat and sleep. Today, I'm living in my new apartment safely, thanks to the support and service providers in Athens, Georgia. Something that is permanent to share with my partner and my daughter. I will continue to be the voice for the people, such as my hero, James Brown, the godfather of soul, ladies and gentlemen. We gotta bring this to the front line. Will you stand with me today in the fight for all people who want better, but just don't know the way? We, the people, divided we stand, together we stand, divided we fall. Thank you for all your time.
Thank you to both Gina for her excellent work and for Jerry for lending his voice to this fight. Now we will hear finally from, or our last speaker, is going to be Senator Kim Jackson from District 41, who is a longtime advocate and one of our champions.
Well, good afternoon. I am State Senator Kim Jackson, and I represent District 41, which covers portions of DeKalb and Gwinnett counties. I have spent several years fighting to solve a statewide issue that's incredibly near to my heart, and I'm excited to be here today with the Southern Poverty Law Center and the SPL Action Fund as they release their new report, Sheltering Injustice. As many of you know, we are dealing with a real crisis in our state. Again, as of 2022, approximately 10,700 people were reported as sleeping homeless or as experiencing homelessness in Georgia. And 52% of those who are experiencing homelessness are sleeping outside, in cars, or in other places not meant for human habitation. We must address this crisis now. And I want to take a moment to acknowledge that the incredible steps that the city of Atlanta has made in alleviating homelessness in this city, including the fact that they opened a brand new 40-unit rapid rehousing community just this Saturday. A huge thank you to the mayor, Andre Dickens, for signing an executive order allocating $4.6 million towards continued efforts to end homelessness. But let me be clear, homelessness is not just an Atlanta issue. This is a statewide crisis that requires a statewide coordinated response. We in the Georgia General Assembly can and must do more. In 2022, as part of a continued step to address this crisis, the Senate formed a bipartisan study committee on unsheltered homelessness. And the Department of Audits and Accounts recently performed an audit on homelessness spending. Both reports, the final report from the study committee and from the state's audits and accounts initiatives, called for a better, higher level coordination process across agencies in Georgia. The SPLC Action Fund explored this idea, and together we've come up with a place where we are wanting to create an interagency council to enact practical solutions for this crisis. There's similar councils like this across the states, and we need one in Georgia. The good news is that our state is not lacking in resources to solve the problem. We're just lacking in coordination to solve the problem. And that's why I am proud to announce today that in coordination with SPLC Action Fund and Legislative Council, we will be introducing legislation that revamps our previous efforts and helps to create an interagency council on homelessness, and one that ensures that the council includes people who have first-hand experience with homelessness. This legislation, I will introduce this legislation in the coming weeks, and I look forward to my colleagues supporting me in this effort to do proactive, good legislation on behalf of and with those who are experiencing homelessness. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Senator Jackson. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to all of the advocates behind me who have been part of this fight with us. That concludes today's press conference. We know that other folks need this space, so we're going to huddle over here to answer any questions from the press. Thank you all again, and have a good afternoon.